Hello, everyone. As just being said, I'm Nuno Sebastião, I'm the CEO of Feedzai. And our mission, just for those who don't know, is to protect financial transactions, organizations from financial crime. So in our world, trust and in systems and compliance is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And one of the things I've been challenging with or thinking a lot about is, humans are wired to trust. I mean, our social interactions over, centuries, millennia, has been about how do we build relationships? How do we trust the systems around people, institutions, societies? And, when we were thinking about this, trust is not just about the technology aspect of it. Is how do we trust in what surrounds us? There's a context, there's a geographical, there's a political environment to all that trust. It's not a single concept, this one of trust. It's a composite built on foundational things like safety, assurance, accountability. So for this panel, it's really important to have the opinion of peoples. I mean, I'll start with saying that everyone says they want trustworthy AI. I mean, I assume the one people in the room I've never met. I personally have never met an engineer, and there's a lot of them here that says I'm going to build an untrustworthy system. People by definition want to build trustworthy systems, but our biases, our backgrounds always kick in, right? And the example we were discussing back there, biometrics, 98% accuracy. Well, if you zoom into that, is maybe 65% if you're of a particular race. So for the 35% people for who the system is not accurate, they suffer from it. And they don't trust the system. So let's talk into the panel here. And I would start with framing trust. With national, international, and here with the United Nations Development Program, with local authorities in the area. I'll start with Angela. What and where do you see this urgent need for trust, and what does it mean for you, and what does it mean for the context here in AI, trust in AI?
Thank you. First of all, happy to be here and discussing about this topic, which is so close to everybody's heart. As as everybody's embracing AI, and especially with Gen AI, we tend to forget what happened when the machine makes mistake that could impact, that have very catastrophic outcome. If it makes a decision that's wrong, it might impact lives or impact certain decisions that goes very wrong. So I think the answer to the question is that in what situations that trust is so important, I would say for mission critical kind of applications, especially in healthcare area or in financials where money is involved, when a person's health is involved. I think those areas, I would say, trust is extremely important. Yeah.
I would move over to Joe. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to thank for, people that work in causes or for good. I mean, Joe here, we're talking backstage, and, someone that worked in Kosovo and in many other, regions throughout the world that needed help, and where trust in someone like United Nations, it's really important, right? So how do you look at it from a national, international, and especially something we were talking about that is, as coming from a developing country, is very close to me. We don't want to leave anyone behind in this new revolution, right? Can you elaborate in those things?
Thanks, Nuno. I mean, what a great question. How do we not leave anyone behind, especially when we're talking about trust? I think we have to recognize that we're really in a formative moment around the discussions on governance, coordination around AI and AI safety and trust. And those mechanisms, there's multilateral mechanisms, UN, OECD. At the regional level, you see a lot of good work as well, a lot of interesting discussions. But what I also see and what really concerns me the most about this movement, I would say, is what's happening to these countries as they try to navigate this polarization. East versus West, we know that one, right? Public versus private. Where is the regulation, the accountability, assurance going to lie? Is it going to be a public sector-driven model or private sector? And then within that, North versus South, broadly speaking, developed versus developing countries. And it's not just around access to the technology. And that's a cost issue. It's the capacity to use that. It's the institutional strength in developing countries to determine their own course of action, whether they're rule takers or rule makers. It's a very, very complex world out there for them. But what I do see, though, is a lot of potential and a lot of, I would say, agility. Many people look at this as a question of have or have not, and that's not correct. Developing countries have a lot of assets, which I think they can leverage in this space. Young populations that have been exposed to and utilizing technology from very early on. You see a lot of investment that has gone into their education systems. That's a massive asset, I think. Access to the resources needed, the electricity to establish data centers, the natural resources necessary to build the foundations. Of course, not saying that they don't have barriers. Data availability and structuring quality is one of them. But I view this with a lens of hope. I do think that there's assets there that they can leverage and utilize as long as they're part of the discussion.
So you believe no one's going to be left behind? Or
I'm not that naive.
So on that of real world and how is this technology that we're all building together impacting out there, I would for both Dr. Chee and Angela, real world examples where in your research, healthcare, financial services, where you see the application of a trust framework working, but also now working. Dr. Chee, I'll start with you.
Okay, I think we asked about trust. I better ask you a question first. Why do you want to ask this question? What do you really want? Now, why is it so important? Because apparently there's no context. Mm-hmm. Just like, can you trust me? Yes, get a cup of coffee, you can trust me. You give me the $10 billion cash and then you go away, can you trust me? No. Okay? So, a lot of time, I think, at this particular moment, okay, we also have the Singapore AI Safety Institute. So, when we talk about trust, a lot of time we talk about trust from the viewpoint of a developer. So, I develop a software, I develop a platform. So, you should trust, okay? So I say you should. Whether you really trust or not, don't know, okay? But from your viewpoint, from the end user viewpoint, then why you want to ask this particular question? Because you are taking some risk. So, are you willing to take the risk? Now, this is interesting because if you want to ask, I want to lower my risk, technology is one aspect, then function as it is, but there are many others that you forget. For example, if someone guaranteed that anything is wrong, I pay you 10 million cash. Do you trust? You trust. Okay? That means there are much more dimensions that you may want to focus, and as a matter of fact, those dimensions are more important than you understand the internal working of this particular equipment. I mean, I'll give you an example. Healthcare, okay? Healthcare. I think about 2 weeks ago, I was in Shanghai. Okay, I rushed to Shanghai. One of my immediate family, he got the stroke about a year ago. Mm-hmm. So then when he was rushed to the hospital, then you know that hospital has a set of rules, guidelines that you can trust, okay? And then to do operation. So you need to have the close relative to sign. Without signing, the hospital is not allowed to do the operation. So it takes 6 hours to finish this particular process.
Whoa.
Okay? Then after that, the recovery is not that good. So his immediate family want to sue the hospital. Then, what should we do? Okay? So we say that the hospital, all the equipment, doctors certify everything perfect. But then, who is taking up the accountability? This is why I say, why do you want to ask this particular question? If you are asking from the user viewpoint, you better understand what you want to get out from that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that one, actually, I always say, technology people like to say whatever he like to say. Okay? But then, from the viewpoint of the end user, I think we need to sit back and then to rethink what we mean by AI trust, AI safety, and so on. Because you are asking actually different question.
Angela, any like to add?
Yeah, I think I just want to share a little bit on the fact that today the trust of the AI system can be eroded. Sometimes it's either due to the AI product is not developed very well, or due to adversarial attacks. So there are two ways, right?
I have to mention, if you allow me, just even yesterday, as I was walking the show floor, and I hope the developers out there don't take me the wrong way. There was a lot of focus on I can enable this, I can enable that, and the same way as any developer out there, and I see it certainly in the developers in my company, you might have a policy to use this AI tool or this development helper, everything. What I do know is for a fact is that they'll go and do whatever they want. Even though you have corporate, let's say, policy on something. And yesterday out there, the development in the demos I've seen, it was exactly that. Developers were, in all the demos I've seen, we're still at a very basic level of people are building stuff. Probably the level of care to the point, where healthcare has been to responsibility, safety. It's not yet there. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think that is the question here, right? I totally agree with you as well. So in the healthcare, we know that we are increasingly relying on chatbot, right, which is supposed to take away the load of the hospital staff, and but the thing is that we have to be very, very careful here because, just a few years ago, there was this chatbot, I think it's called Tesla, it's in the US, where it's supposed to give some advice on people with eating disorders, but it's sort of it wasn't really trained that well. It's giving harmful advices. So when incidents like that happen, you can imagine that they have to quickly put a stop to it because the harm is already done by giving false advices. So that's why I say healthcare is very important. And for finance sectors, I think the problem is there are a lot of incidents of adversarial attacks, scams, right? People are being spoofed to imagine the video conference was real. I think the case in point is in Hong Kong, where the staff thought that the CFO had a video conference with him and asked for money, and he actually thought it's real. This is a result of adversarial attacks. And also the failure of the company system maybe to sort of authenticate or identify this threat early enough. I think these are the two main points.
And what I see, absolutely, and what I see out there is people actually incorporating in their training and development methodologies, how do you deal with impersonation? CEO impersonation, CFO impersonation in all these organizations. So on this topic of safety, Joe, AI safety, it's, from the way I see it, a lot of it is the way we behave as humans and how do we build these systems, but it's also the way they're developed and validated. What do you see out there? Because you travel the real world. You're just giving me an example backstage on Kenya and stuff like that. Do you see progress being made? You're a positive person, so tell me about that.
I think really that's sort of in the eye of the beholder. Is progress being made? I am an optimist. I do see progress being made in that these types of discussions actually are happening, and we're starting to get into the granularity and the complexity of what trust and safety actually means. And I see those discussions happening in different places because it's inherently subjective and it's inherently culturally specific about how trust and safety is imbued. And that's picking up on what Prof was saying earlier. And I think there's also a shift I'm seeing in many of the countries saying, why are we starting from a point of zero when we have systems in place to manage some of these questions already? You know, tort-based systems or compensation-based systems in the medical malpractice field, they exist. And countries are saying, really, why don't we start from examining how those systems can work vis-a-vis this technology? So there's an element of pragmatism.
Yeah, one of the things I would recommend to the developers in the room and that we do in our own company is, you know, we mimic the Hippocratic Oath, right? Which is something that in medicine, it's been there for quite some time. It's established. It's a very simple set of principles on which you should abide. Every doctor, you know, abides by, right? Is that what you're referring to? Or mimicking certain types of systems?
I think that, but you also have, of course, different accountability mechanisms for when something goes wrong. In many countries, these have existed for a long time. So if you're in the US and a medical practice goes wrong, medical procedure goes wrong, there's a tort-based system for which you can then seek redress. In the EU, it's a no-fault compensation model, and you can seek redress through that. So these are established systems. In the developing countries, largely because of history, similar models exist. And that's the starting point, I think, for many of them, saying, why don't I start from where I am now? And rather than focus specifically on setting up something completely for the technology in absence of a sectoral application, why don't we look at it from another perspective? We already have this system. What are the risks or perceptions of risk that are going to be imbued or enhanced by this technology, and start from that point?
That actually made me think, will we see anytime soon an AI system being sued? For everyone.
I completely agree with Joe. When we talk about the trust or safety and so on, independent of what technology you are using, whether it's AI or not AI, actually, if you want to focus on the outcome, I mean, I said it will depend on what you are asking. So if I'm talking about the risk, let's say in the healthcare sector, the patient. So there are already rules, guideline, principle, protocol that people agree it's not perfect, but it's accepted by the community. Okay? So I think it will be extremely critical for AI people to understand what has been accepted to start with. Then after that, I always say two questions. Okay, question number one, you say AI is powerful. How can this powerful AI help to fulfill the requirement that I accepted? Okay, you can do faster, you can do it smartly, you can do it collaboratively, and so on. Second question, you can propose. Let's say this is the existing safety or the trust framework is there. I mean, with new technology, no matter this AI, not AI, the community will regularly revisit, okay, whether this set of guideline rules should be updated or not. So I think this is a more practical approach to the so-called AI trust.
Okay. So I'm a developer. Let's assume that, right? And, you know, I hear all this stuff talking about trust, but I have to ship a product. And I have a deadline to get it done. You know, like all the startups here trying to, you know, survive, define a market. I got to get the product out because otherwise, you know, I don't have a business. So it's all about, you know, performance of my product, you know, speed to market and transparency or, you know, trust in whatever model I'm building. Let's start with Angela. I mean, if you have to drop, if I'm a developer, a software company, and if you have to drop any of these to ship a product tomorrow, what kind of trade-off should the audience make? I mean, if you know, because it's easy for us to say, oh, we have to build systems that are trustworthy and all that, but I have to ship a product. What would I drop from between transparency, trust, or performance?
Wow. Well, I think it depends on the intended use of the AI product. If it's something for very critical outcomes, I don't think you should drop any of that. I mean, to me, I feel that some of the ways to make sure your AI model works and is trustworthy or trusted, can deliver what it's supposed to do. It's really the accuracy of the model. And just now you used the word transparency, right? Could you explain, there's an explainability factor there. That means we understand how and why the AI makes certain decisions in this way. So the developers has to understand that very clearly. It cannot be a guesswork. And the accuracy level of the AI systems needs to be really, really very high, as high as you can, to a certain level that you feel that's acceptable for that use case before you roll it out. I think that one is no compromise. And I think just when we were talking, I thought of this point about, the developers always think that what they've done is the best and they have super confidence in it. How about having an independent team to do a red teaming or, just to check the codes, right? I think this could be some of the ideas that we might want to think about, all right, today. When we say, you say it's trustworthy, how do we know? Can we actually test it and prove that it's really working, as you said? I think these are some of the points I'd like to share. Yep.
Joe, what do you want to add? Anything to add?
I mean, I would almost pity the developer, right? If it's their choice only on whether to do this or not. My goodness, that they're going to be having some sleepless nights in many jurisdictions, I would suspect. But I guess that's the matter for me, is whose choice? Who sets these parameters, and how do we collectively decide what those trade-offs are based upon the culture, the needs of the country, and what's happening? And that's why I say it's not the private sector's sole responsibility. I don't believe that to be true. I believe the role of the public sector is critical. The role of government is critical in this space. And I guess to try to answer your question about who makes those choices, and that is the framework that needs to be examined, because I don't believe it should be on the developer to have to weigh that if they're not provided with those guardrails. Now, again, being pragmatic, technology is always outpacing regulation. There's always this time of uncertainty where there's a lag behind what we as societies choose and the parameters we establish and where the technology is pushing us. And I think at that point, it comes down to these discussions on really prioritizing mission critical, highest risk versus perhaps something that is of lower risk. And again, risk in the eye of the beholder in terms of the country and its specific context.
One of the things you mentioned when we were talking backstage was, the reason why you set up shop here was to export some of the best practices you see happening here in Singapore due to the sophistication of government, the kind of the approach they go about it. So, and you talk about the role of regulation and governments, together with the private sector. So, what do you think should be? Should it be like as Dr. Chee was saying, in some areas where for you to deploy a certain system, you have to pass a set of regulation tests. Europe, I'm European, I think I can say that we're prodigal at everything that is over-regulated and, but there are some good things that come out of it. What's your take of, regulation and let's call it assurance in a way, and what should governments or regulators do, and the fine line between imposing and letting the market play?
I mean, the joy I have about being in Singapore is that I do get to revel in this ecosystem. And one thing that's always struck me about Singapore is the pragmatism that's present here. Testing, trying, didn't work, move on and learn. There's something to be said about that approach, especially in a rapidly evolving technological context, that I find, it's quite unique in many ways, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. Across multiple sectors here in Singapore, I see very active communities of public, private academia working as holistic ecosystems, asking these questions and asking them openly and exploring.
Give me an example. Give me an example of one of them.
In the health side. So they have AI and health guidelines here in Singapore that were very much a collective product. There was a declaration that came out a month ago of bottom-up research from around the world issued by Singapore discussing some of these elements. In the legal sector, Singapore is looking at AI use in the judiciary. When do you need a lawyer in the loop? When do you not? At what extent can you trust that? there's this type of pragmatism in Singapore, I think, bodes well because it shows how you can bring together different aspects of your society to have very open conversations and to iteratively build the regulation and the policy as you learn and as you apply. And I find that approach very, very powerful. And I know that's also something maybe unique to Singapore, but I think there's lessons that we can learn from it, certainly that we are learning as the UN Development Program.
Awesome. Dr. Chee, anything you want to add on this?
I think there is something basic that we need to offer. Two things. Number one is the transparency.
Mm-hmm.
That means that before you make any decision, things need to belong to you. Okay, I think this applies to all the sectors. Let's say the financial investment. They need to let you know what are the terms, conditions, consequences, and so on. So transparency is the number one. Then you want people don't get confused on many things. So you want to say, I want to so-called control the quality. Okay? So you do different kind of testing, say that this is good, this is not good, and so on. Okay? But this is only the starting, this is not the ending, this is not your end result. Your end result is always your risk and your cost. Mm-hmm. That means after this is transparent, after you know that this is what you get, okay? You need to make a decision. For example, if I say this AI system, the accuracy is 70%, then you say, why not 90%? Of course, I want 90%, but you ask me for $1 million, I don't have.
Yeah.
I don't have. Okay? So, I think a lot of time, this always boils down to the cost and the risk. Okay? And if you can help people to understand, to balance, then that is good. Regulation is important. Why is important? Because regulation tries to take up the accountability. That means, I do this testing, if it fails, if the accuracy below 70%, but I certify that I take up the accountability. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, regulation only helps you, but still the same, at the end of the day, you decide. You decide. Because nothing is perfect.
That actually takes me to the next point, which is, I call it this fairness narrative, right? We say, the systems, should be fair, and we're talking about fairness as a goal, when in reality, in these systems, it should be the floor, it should be the minimum. So the question would be, and talking about this north and south, differences and the fear that countries have today that they're going to be left out. So shouldn't we be aiming for systems that actually create and foster equity or equality among all these stakeholders, all the people, and taking this to an area where we talk about agents and agentic AI, and that by definition is the replacement end to end of tasks that today are done by humans. That actually seems that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So, Dr. Angela, how do you see people getting comfortable with that, trusting those agents where, as we are at the beginning of that phase, we see companies trying, the very examples of, Klarna in Europe, that they replaced a lot of their people with agents and they had to roll that back. Sales development representative companies out there. So they're actually not creating equality or equity, they're actually taking some of that away. How should we balance and trust the systems while we see these experiments going on? Any thoughts, Dr. Angela?
Yeah, I think when you talk about agentic AI, which is having the machines make decisions on your behalf, we're talking about a different level of autonomy that you've given to the machine, which can be very scary if you don't manage it well.
Yeah.
I think, like Dr. Chee said, sometimes the weighing of budget versus accuracy, you don't have all the time or budget to develop something that's close to 100%. And sometimes corporations make certain decisions for whatever reasons, right? I feel that, you need to weigh the pros and cons, but more importantly, can we build in some fail-safes? Certain programs, certain conditions that the machine will never do things like that. Sort of like called hard-coded into the AI. For example, if you are giving out healthcare advice, you just have to tell the machine that, look, you are not a certified or licensed doctor. Don't ever say this or don't ever prescribe certain thing. I don't know, something along that line. So program it that way so that the machine, the response is sort of guarded within certain boundaries. Then the rest of the errors, if it happens, they are not that so-called catastrophic. So this is to minimize the kind of risk that you get from deploying such a system.
Yeah. Joe, how do you build on that? And again, as you work throughout the world, you see, the easiest targets for some of these agents to do is actually replace, labor in lower income or lower type of countries. How are they looking at that? And how do they trust that, okay, AI is going to be an agent for good, and these trust frameworks are actually going to enable them to do more, as opposed to massive unemployment in these countries from a society standpoint?
There's been some interesting research. We just launched a global report called It's a Matter of Choice, focusing on human agency in AI. Because a lot of the countries are having very vibrant discussions, developing countries, around this specific issue. And they're very informed by previous waves of technological change and how that has...
Give us an example. Give us real examples.
For instance, how call centers have created a massive labor market, lots of jobs augmented by this technology that came, 25, 30 years ago, right? And some of the countries are seeing risk in that this technology could displace large proportions of those jobs. But they're also having a very nuanced conversation of saying, well, how can that technology also augment the skills so that
of those same people,
so that they provide more service or a higher degree or quality of service, or that they're able to answer
any tangible results that you're seeing out there?
I think on agentic it's too soon.
Okay.
But that these discussions are happening now are good, because it is a matter of choice. If we look at this technology from the perspective of augmentation, complementing, and of course with almost any technology you will see some displacement in job loss, but you may also see the creation of new roles. I think within these developing countries, they're especially cognizant of the fact that they have highly educated, very high talent in the technological space, and a lot of them, and that it can be an accelerator for economic development in the right conditions. It's not necessarily only being viewed as strictly a risk of loss and displacement,
but as a possibility.
Absolutely.
I'm going to open the floor for questions really soon, just after I get Dr. Chee, and any view on this.
Okay, I think agentic to me nothing new. Nothing new. Okay, I remember.
Tell us more.
10, 20 years ago, we are talking about all these agents, services. Okay, surface computing. Okay, about 15 years ago, I've been doing lots of this kind of automation. Okay, orchestration, workflow, all this kind of thing. So why is so new? Okay, we all want to have the automation. This is for sure. I think it's a matter of how you position yourself. I think this is important. On one hand, you can say that, this particular entity replaced my job. Okay, I lost my job. But at the same time, let's say, I talked about Indonesia, for example. Okay? So that means you talk about agentic AI, that means you need to build a lot of these agents, right? So to build it in Singapore, I think you need to pay about 10K per month for a normal software engineer. In Indonesia, it's only about 1K.
Wow.
That means if you position correctly, suddenly there are lots of jobs waiting for you This is serious. Okay? So it's really a matter of how you look at the technology. I mean, technology is advancing. How you position yourself in order to get the maximum benefit. I think this is more important. Then we always say, you do this, I lost my job.
Awesome. I would say I love the positivity in the panel here, and because I have 30 seconds before any questions come in, otherwise they shut me down. Any questions from the audience? I know there's some mics, some microphones around. I actually cannot see anything, so there we go. I don't know if there's even a question. Oh, there you are.
Hello, everyone. It was an amazing talk. So I am a machine learning researcher myself, and I come from India, and I'm working on a research project in NUS. So when you were talking about, agentic systems, and there are two ways to control an agentic system. It can be centralized or decentralized. So in centralized, as Angelina suggested, that you have a particular sample space, and the agentic system is going to give outputs just based on that. And in decentralized, we give control to the agentic system to give outputs according to itself. So what are your views on that, and which area should we focus on, and in which particular fields should we focus on centralized systems, and in which fields we should be focused on decentralized systems? Because some people, in the research field, they have views that if you give control to the agents, it can be harmful, but at the same time, it can also be revolutionary. So, yeah.
Who wants to go? Angela? Chee?
Okay, maybe I say something on different centralized versus decentralized. I think it's still, I always like to do the trade-off. Okay? Centralized, there's good things. Why not? Okay? Mm-hmm. You take care of all my headache. Decentralized, you think it's cheaper. Sometimes it may not be cheaper. Okay? Decentralized, you think it's good. There are always other things that you need concern, for example, privacy. Okay? So to build a decentralized privacy-preserving solution is very, very much harder. Of course, in some situations, I just don't want to be centralized. So it is hard to say it must be A or B. You really look into exactly what you want, what you are going to pay, and then what are the constraints that you are subject to.
Well, thank you. Anyone want to add? We have 7 seconds before we have to wrap. So, look, thank you everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed this panel. You guys have been very, gracious with your answers. Thank you. We're going to be around, so I'm sure there's more questions. Please reach out to any of these illustrious folks, to myself, and we'll be happy to talk further. Thank you.